Well, good morning, everybody. So today we're going to talk about when you move to a new property, as I just did, how you evaluate that property for what to plant where. What are you looking for? What factors do you take into consideration? And what do you start with? You can't do everything all at once, or I can anyway. So I'm going to talk to you about how I made those decisions and made those determinations. Now, the first thing we want to understand is what we're looking for. It's really important when you get a new property that you spend some time observing. You want to understand where the sunlight is, what's getting the most sun, what's getting the least sun, how is it going to be affected through the seasons, because the sun moves, y'all. So it's really important to understand your sunlight. It's super important. It is also really important to understand how and where water flows on your property. I live in a very dry area. It is still super important to understand where are the driest zones in your yard, where are the wettest zones in your yard. And don't assume, especially if you live in town like I do, and you have a small yard, and you have a gutter system and downspouts, don't assume your water comes out of the downspout like it's supposed to. It doesn't always. So it's really important to really assess where that water is coming from, where it's going, how your property is being affected by what's around you, by your neighbors, what they have in their yards, what buildings they have in their yards, and where that water is going. Really important. Even if you have something that looks flat, my backyard looks flat. It's not. So we're going to go out to the backyard and we're going to talk about a few things. Now this is a shot of the backyard from a few weeks ago, and I was looking at where sunlight goes. This is the beginning of May, beginning of the long sunlight. Around here normally we plant after Mother's Day. We still had freeze warnings the first week, or right before the 1st of May, and so we don't plant here until, generally speaking, around Mother's Day most years. So this was right at the beginning of the season, and I am trying to evaluate where in my yard gets the most sunlight. Now you can see here, my neighbors to the north have a ginormous tree in their backyard that's right on my fence. However, one of the things you'll see here is that tree does not shade my yard at all, and it is on the north side, so it does not affect my sunlight. I have a tree in my backyard, and it's a good sized tree, but it only affects sunlight up until about 10:30. So that's good to know, because that's going to affect where I plant things. On the south side of my house, there's a small building, there's 8-foot fences, there's my house that shades the yard part of the time, but still there's an area that gets that minimum 6 to 8 hours of sunlight every day. And when I say 6 to 8 hours, most plants, whether they be vegetables, trees, berries, that need sun, need 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day, and that's full sun. That's not dappled or anything like that. If you're planting something that needs partial shade, then that's where you get your dappled sunlight. You're partially shaded where it gets just a few hours of sunlight. But I'm talking about full sun, which is 6 to 8 hours a day. And you need to know where those zones are so you can plant intelligently and you don't end up with plants that are struggling. Now, when I think about my yard, there's only so much I can do. I'm one person. So I'm going to be really careful and thoughtful about what I plant. I've had huge gardens before and even sold at the farmer's market. I tend to plant too much. We all do. Hey, that's just a disease, right? We all have grower's disease where we plant too much. And I have a small yard, relatively speaking. And I want to ensure I'm only planting those things that I'm going to use, that I'm going to eat. And so when I evaluate and I'm looking at what to plant where, I'm also thinking about which plants I'm going to start with. And my thought process is I start with the plants that are going to take the longest to mature. In my case, trees. I wanted to plant some fruit trees, but as I look back, and this is something for you to think about, I'm not just going to plant any fruit tree. And I'll have a big box store rant here in a minute, but I'm not just going to plant any fruit tree. I think about, okay, which fruit do I really buy a lot of, that I pay money for at the grocery store, that I buy a lot of? What fruit do I really enjoy? And for me, that is apples. I eat apples year-round, all the time, and cherries. When cherries are in season, and specifically sweet cherries, Rainier cherries, I just love them. I will eat them by the quart, just love them. And they're expensive, right? Guess what? Cherry trees are expensive too. So when I'm thinking about what I eat, that's what I'm going to plant. And because I'm one person and I have a small yard, I'm going to plant dwarf versions of those trees. I'm not going to have a big orchard. I'm not going to grow ginormous trees that I have to take care of and that take all my time. I'm going to plant little dwarf trees. They don't get more than 10 feet tall. I can take care of them myself, prune them, whatever. It's only going to take me a few minutes. And so these are the factors that I'm taking into consideration. When I'm going to plant a tree somewhere, I don't have to think, oh, in 10 years, this tree is going to be 20 feet tall. No, these are little bitty trees that I can take care of, and consequently, I can put in a very small space if it's the right space. So when I was doing this evaluation, that's what I was evaluating it for. Now it rains very little here. I mean, we get 19 inches a year. It rains very little. However, luckily this morning, early, it was raining. And so when it is raining, you want to go out and see where your water is flowing. Now it rained last week about an inch. So the grass is starting to green up, which is very helpful when you're trying to see where the water goes. Even though my yard looks flat, it actually has a slight slope from the north to the south. And you can really see that in this video I took this morning, that the north side of the yard, where the neighbor's tree is at over there, is absolutely the driest area of the yard. Right along that fence is the driest area, and it's the highest elevation-wise, even though it's slight. And as you look across the yard, you can see there are some low spots. Like back there by the workshop is a low spot right there. And you would think, because that tree is there, my tree that's in my backyard, that it would be dry over there. But it's not, because it's a low spot, and so it collects water. Now, as you come across the yard to this other little building, you'll see this is really where most of the water ends up in my yard. It flows from north to south. It ends up on this south side. On the south side, behind the little building and by my patio, is the wettest area. You can see this. You can see the grapevine. There are 2 grapevines in the yard that were already planted here, and they are doing fabulously. And there's several reasons for that. Number one, it's the wettest part of the yard. It's also very well protected from wind or anything like that. And the wind here is tremendous. Amarillo gets so much wind, y'all. If you Google windiest areas in the U.S., Amarillo is in the top 1, 2, 3, depending on what they're looking at. It is so windy here. And this is a really protected area, which is also a good thing. Another thing you'll notice about this side of the yard is my neighbor on this side, on the south side, has a garage over there. And next to this garage is cement. And you can see his gutters are not in great shape. And so all of the water on this side of his garage comes out of his gutters, hits the cement, and flows under the fence right about where that grapevine is. Another reason that grapevine is so happy there. And it also makes this area wet. Now, one of the things that I notice when it's raining, there is a gutter that carries most of the water on the back side of my house right along my patio. And the downspout is at the corner of the patio. And my assumption was, well, that's where the water comes out, right? No. Number one, this gutter has a small leak on the back side of the gutter. It's just a slit and you wouldn't be able to see it or notice it if you didn't go out there when it's raining. Additionally, this gutter has a bunch of crap in it. It hasn't been cleaned out in forever. We were in months of drought prior to this. And so moving into this house, one of the things the inspection noticed was the gutters needed to be cleaned. Just haven't done it. So there's a bunch of stuff in this gutter that is preventing the water from going everywhere. And you can see in this shot, as the rain picked up a little bit, that water runs right over to the gutter, into this area over here on the south side of the house by the patio, and it becomes a lake. The day we got 1.25 inches of rain, it was raining at 3 inches per hour. That happened in like 20 minutes, and it was a lake. It was kind of dark, and so I couldn't take good video of it, but it was really wet over here. So dealing with the gutters and figuring out where to direct that water is going to be something that is very high on my priority list. I'll be dealing with that immediately because I need to take care of that. This is still going to be a wet side of the yard no matter what, because all the water from the rest of the yard comes this direction. So, and you can see right here is a hole for one of my cherry trees. I'm going to be planting both my little cherry trees right here. These dwarf cherry trees only need 10 feet of space. So you can plant them 10 feet apart on centers. And that's very, very small. They're very small trees. And you know, the wind here really whips little fruit trees. It's one of the reasons we struggle to have fruit trees in this area, is if you don't have a really protected area, they will get whipped to death. And you know, people will say, well, put them in a tube. Well, that's great. But then when they get branches, you can't put those in a tube. They get whipped to death. Seriously? Ugh. Any hoodles. You want a protected area. So I have my 2 cherry trees, which I'm going to be planting hopefully this weekend if it stops raining. And I also have coming 2 apple trees. And I'll be doing those first. I've also ordered a couple of hazel trees. I've never grown hazelnuts, but I'm going to try it this year. I'm going to put, and they're actually bushes. They're not trees. They're just little shrubs. And you can plant them really close together. And, what's that? Huh, this cat. And anyway, you can plant them really close together, and they actually just form shrubs. So they're very easy to take care of. I mean, it will be several years before any of these things produce. So I plant them first. And I'll show you when I plant those, and I'll talk a little bit about what varieties I bought and why, and how I'm going to take care of them. So those videos will be coming to you pretty soon. And I started this video with a little bit of footage of some of the roses. One of the things I love in this area that grows really well are roses. So I've been really pleased with the selection. I've got a climbing rose. I've got various colors of roses. I'll be adding to that, I'm sure, over time. But for right now, I'm just really pleased with what's already on the property. It's not a lot, but there are some things. Just like the grapevine. There are actually 2 grapevines. I have no clue if these grapevines are ornamental or if they're actually edible or what kind they are. So I'm just going to let them grow and see, which is always fun. It's like a surprise. But I will be talking to you more and more about the various things I'm planting. But it is critical when you have a property not to make assumptions. Not to assume just because your downspout somewhere, that's where the water goes. Not to assume your property's flat or that it doesn't have a low spot or a high spot. You've got to really observe what's going on with your property, what the temperatures are like in various areas of your property. That's something I really didn't talk about. But this protected area on the south side of the patio is actually one of the warmest spots in my yard. Another reason I'm going to put my trees there. During the winter, I want to be sure they're in the warmest area of the yard. During the summer, it's not as big a deal, but here the winter is what usually kills trees. It's not the summer. The winters get brutally cold, and with the wind chill, that's what kills trees. And so I want to ensure they're in the warmest area of the yard. But I really wanted to talk about this first. There are so many things I'm going to be talking about over the next weeks and months as I set up my garden that seem like small things. And evaluating your property before you plant anything seems like a small thing, especially if you have a small property. It doesn't seem like it's that big a deal. It's actually huge. There are so many people that I see in person, and I hear them talk, and even online, that will talk about, well, I don't understand. My neighbor has such a lush yard and it's so pretty, and I do the exact same things, and my plants just don't seem to do as well. Okay, well, number one, you're not doing the exact same things. Logic would tell you that. There's a problem. And number two, a lot of times those problems are actually these small things that you're just not getting, or you're not really understanding their value, or you think they're no big deal if you do it one way versus another way. They actually are a big deal. And all of these little things add up to your plants thriving or disappointment. And actually this brings up the big box rent. And I know, I'm just going to say it anyway. Big box stores do not sell things that necessarily thrive in your area. What they will do is they look on their little chart and says, hey, this thrives in zones 5 to 8. We can sell this everywhere. No, I swear y'all, and this is a dry area. They don't take moisture into account. They're down there at Sutherland's, and yes, Sutherland's, I'm looking at you, selling magnolia trees and hydrangeas, things that do not grow here. Don't get me wrong. I know of one magnolia tree in town, one, because it's actually not too far from where I lived, and it's not too far from where I lived when I lived here before. It's never gotten more than 20 feet tall. It is spindly, it does not look full and lush, and they put so much water and so much energy into that plant, and it still is not what I would call thriving. And that's the problem. When you pick plants that do not take your moisture, your wind into account, and they only take your growing zone into account, you're going to have things that struggle. There are people here that can grow hydrangeas. They will never look like they look back in North Carolina or back east somewhere where there is lots of moisture, or even downstate like Houston, where there's lots of moisture, where you get lots of rain, and where the wind doesn't blow 70 miles an hour. Wind will tear up a hydrangea just horribly. And so they will always struggle here. People here a lot of times just treat them like annuals because it's hard to get them to grow more than a couple of seasons. The weather here is too extreme, even though the big box store sells them. The big box store doesn't care whether your plants thrive and where you are. They're just selling plants, okay? They don't care if it's the right plant for you. So you've got to be really cautious and careful about that kind of thing, especially these days because plants are expensive. So beware your big box store. Just because it says it's your growing zone doesn't mean it won't die on you. Odds are it will. And this is really true with fruit trees. They sell a basic variety. A lot of times they don't tell you about trees that need pollinators. They don't tell you which pollinators they need. And they're just not really great if you're trying to grow something that's going to do well. It's really important that you buy, especially your long-term plants, your perennials, your trees, your berries, from reputable growers that give you good information. They give you every opportunity to have success with that plant. My trees I bought from Stark Brothers. There are lots of good orchard nursery type places online. They ship them great. They arrive in great shape. They're really healthy. They give you all the information you need. They know they're not sponsoring this video. But that's the kind of place you want to buy things from. They also have a guarantee. If you do all the right things and it dies on you, they replace it. I love that. These trees are not cheap. So just keep that in mind. When you go to your big box store, you're not going to be getting probably what you need that's going to do well in your area. There are always exceptions, but I'm just saying, beware big box stores. So when you move to a property, or maybe you're on a property you've been on for years, take some time and really evaluate. If you're going to be planting new things, new trees especially, new bushes, evaluate your property before you do it, so you will be as successful as you can possibly be. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.